If the injured worker injures him or herself on a Friday, trivializes the injury, and thinks, well, I have the whole weekend to recover, I think I'll be fine by Monday. And I've seen that happen numerous times. On Monday, they discover, my injury is much more serious, I'm going to report it. Guess what? You've just thrown a wrench in your claim, and now it's going to be much more difficult to prove that it happened at work unless it was witnessed, unless you reported it, because the insurance companies generally, and I've seen this happen time and time again, they're going to assume that something happened over the weekend. You must have done something. Either you cut some tree limbs, you lifted something heavy, who knows what the excuse is, but they generally they'll harp on that point. You didn't report it on the Friday. The weekend happened. Something must have occurred. Something must have intervened over the weekend to cause your injury. So yes, it's extremely important to report it right away. Do not let the weekend pass without reporting your injury.
Well, let's flip the equation. Often, and we at South Texas Crossfire, we support businesses as well, and we defend them, and so, and advise them, as well as, people that have had accidents, or, qualified attorneys like Mr. Gonzalez, who have done workers' compensation and other disability and things like that. When we're looking at that, we also have to turn it around and also try to balance it out. The employer, things to remember: the employer. You've got to look at your employees that you hire. If it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, if they injure, but they've had 10 back surgeries, and they've got to disclose all that. You've got to let them get checked out medically before they perform any type of work. There's a lot of risk management that goes along with it. Often people are just automatically assuming, well, I'm going to get sued, there's nothing I can do about it. And as you're pointing out, that's not exactly true, because a lot of the time there's a lot of defenses and a lot of wiggle room that the employer has, because, as you said, the employee will minimize it, trivialize it, and often, I hate to say it, but it has occurred where people will exaggerate their injuries and then come back and say, well, I heard it at work a little, and then I picked up my granddaughter, who's now 12, and weighs 120 pounds or whatever, and I threw out my back even worse. And some people might try to lump things together. So often the argument on the defense side for the employers is, wait a minute, some of these guys milk the system, not everyone is honest. And how do you respond to that if you're on the side of the injured workers? See, we're playing devil's advocate.
Well, that's
here.
fine, Joe. I think I have a pretty good answer. And the reason why I don't think that really occurs as frequently as one would assume is because there's not a whole lot of money in workers' comp. You really are not going to make very much money in workers' comp. It's not like the old days where they would pay a lump sum benefit. Someone who's going to be in workers' comp generally is not going to be a malingerer, because generally speaking, they only get between 70 and 75% of their pre-injury earnings.
Oof.
So that means they're only going to be making 70% of whatever they were earning, okay? And if their case was disputed from the very beginning, that means they don't get anything until their case is deemed compensable. In other words, the insurance carrier may be denying the injury. They might say, that didn't happen in the course and scope of your employment, so we're going to deny this claim in its entirety. And guess what? The injured worker may not be able to go back to work. He might spend 2 or 3 months out of work with no pay.
So the system, what I'm hearing you say is that the system, back in the quote-unquote old days, 10, 15, 20 years ago, the system was
the golden years.
The golden years, but the system was set up, in other words, where it could be to the benefit of the worker to say, hey, I'm going to get a lump sum, I'm going to get some money, maybe there was more room for abuse. But what I'm hearing you say is now there's not that much incentive. So the old arguments, or the old defense attorney arguments, this guy's looking to hit the lottery, this guy's looking to get a cash cow, free check, stay home and watch Hollywood Squares or whatever, that is gone. In other words, your pay will be delayed several months, which for most people means we live paycheck to paycheck, so they'll go under. And number two, then you won't get paid for months. And number three, you might get paid half or 75 cents on the dollar.
That's right. And it's actually even less than that, Joe. And
why is that?
This is why, because the legislature, in the old days, if a claim was denied and it took an attorney to go in there and fight for the injured worker and finally prove, hey, this injury actually happened at work and it is compensable, and you should have never denied this claim in the first place. If you could get to that point and overcome all of those hurdles, then the injured worker would receive the disability benefits that he or she was entitled to. Then the attorney's fees I mean, the injured worker's attorney doesn't work for free, but in the old days, the attorney's fees were paid directly from the insurance company. Today, Joe, the attorney's fees from that the injured worker's attorney accumulates is paid out of the benefits from the injured worker.
Oof.
And this is what makes it even worse, is that the insurance company should never have denied the claim in the first place, because the attorney proved that the injury was legitimate, that it was compensable, and that the injured worker is entitled to temporary disability benefits.
Well, so the break it down for us a little bit. You started there about the person gets injured at work. He may or may not trivialize it. We've used the example of a blue-collar worker who's physically injured, back injury, didn't report it, maybe came back on Monday. They're already starting behind the 8 ball a little bit, because they're having to justify, why didn't you report it? Where are your witnesses? You probably heard it somewhere else. So already they're building a case against them, aren't they?
Already. And usually the employer, and this is something that frequently happens, the employer has I'll just say a clinic or a medical facility that they divert the injured workers to go and see, because they got to get a drug screen right off the bat. Every injured worker in almost all cases is required to take a drug screen. And usually they send them to this facility, and those are known as, company doctors. In the industry, we refer to that area as company doctors. And generally, when I see that happen, I cringe, because there are some areas, and I'm not going to name names.
Wise choice. Yeah.
I'm not going to name names, but there are
Although
areas,
I'm sure you'd like to.
I would love to. I just, I'd like to live peacefully here, Joe.
Right. Yeah.
But there are these companies, these facilities that will return the injured workers, no matter how serious their injuries are, back to work with restrictions. No matter that they have fractured ribs, broken arm, a torn tendon, they're going back to work. Well, they're not going back full duty.
Well, why not? I mean, they're going on light duty. Why can't they do that?
Well, sometimes after a serious injury, the injured worker really needs to have some sort of rest, maybe even a couple of days, but they're out there, the restrictions, as unrealistic as they may be, okay, you can't use your right hand at all, you can't bend, you can't stoop, you can't climb stairs, you can't grasp with your right hand, but you know what? That employer's going to find something.
Lay down on the carpet at work and watch the paper shredder go or something.
Right.
And why, well, let me stop you there. Why, you're an employer, all right, and let's look at it from the employer's standpoint. You're an employer, whatever clinic that we're talking about, clinic A, B, or C, we're not going to use names, and of course the opinions voiced here don't reflect that of the station or of South Texas Crossfire or the producers or the writers. But with that being said, what we're doing is just using a generic clinic. Now, they say go back to work even if you're injured. What advantage does that have for the employer? I mean, really, I might be exhibiting a little naivete here, but what benefit does that have if you're sending somebody who basically is injured? What benefit do you have of sending them back to work?
Well, the insurance company, if the employer can accommodate the injured worker, then the workers' comp insurance doesn't have to pay out temporary disability benefits.
Bingo. Okay.
Right. And that in turn may affect the premiums that the employer is going to pay. Too many workers' comp claims, the premiums start climbing up. In fact, I've seen in this business where the employer will privately, out of the employer's pocket, pay the doctor's office and try to suppress a workers' comp claim.
And just so they'll avoid what I talked about, because I've gotten quoted, give me some workers' comp codes, and then they give it to me, and as an employer, I'm reaching for the oxygen because it's like $10,000, $20,000 a month for workers' compensation. What profit would you make in a business if you carried workers' compensation, on top of insurances and things? And employers do have to accommodate that and everything. So you're saying they'll try to settle it out. Now, is that illegal, or is that just frowned upon?
Well, Joe, I think it's a bad practice, because the benefit of having a workers' comp claim for the injured worker is that they're entitled to reasonable and necessary medical care for life on whatever the compensable injury is. Mm-hmm. So if the employer suppresses or prevents a workers' compensation claim, then there is no claim. What if the injured worker has problems a year later from a disc pathology that never made it into a workers' comp claim? After a year, it's too late.